The newcomer, a vampire, didn't consume fresh blood to strengthen herself. Instead, she spent her days hunting in the forest, offering her prey to humans in exchange for assimilating into their ranks. In her previous life, after her identity was exposed, she was hunted by paladins. Unable to obtain fresh blood due to constant hiding, she couldn't unleash her true vampire power and ultimately met a tragic end at their hands. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself in a cave, and my limbs, severed by the paladins, had fully healed. Looking around the bed, I realized this was the place I had stayed before the hunt. Confirming my rebirth, I immediately rushed into the forest. This time, I wouldn't foolishly hide like in my previous life. We vampires absorb power by drinking blood. The stronger the blood's owner, the greater the power we gain. So, I ran without stopping to a swamp in the center of the forest. As soon as I stopped, a gigantic monster burst from the water with a gaping maw. The king of the forest was also my purpose in coming here. Although my current body struggled to even dodge his attacks, if I could inflict even the slightest wound, I could rapidly grow stronger through that drop of blood. I gripped my short blade tightly, leaped into the air, and landed on his head before thrusting forward. But to my surprise, with a clang, the blade shattered in my hand. The next second, the monster flicked its tail at me, the powerful impact sending me flying dozens of meters. I barely managed to regain my footing, but the attack had severely injured me, giving me no chance to catch my breath. The monster opened its mouth again, attacking me. Unable to dodge, I was tossed around in its mouth, finally biting my upper body tightly and dragging me into the depths of the swamp, ready to feast on me. But why would I hesitate to seize this opportunity bestowed upon me by heaven? With the last of my strength, I bit down on the monster's tongue and began desperately sucking its blood. Then, taking advantage of the monster's, the moment the pain subsided and I opened my mouth, I struggled to climb towards the more tender part of his tongue. As his blood continued to flow into my body, my once emaciated body slowly began to fill out, and even my head began to grow long, lustrous black hair again. With renewed strength, I continued climbing deeper, and then discovered a gem that shimmered with red light. I immediately recognized it as the Wanderer's magic stone. These monsters, who didn't live in the demon realm but roamed the natural world, were called wanderers. Even in environments without magic, a very small number of them would still produce magic stones within their bodies, sometimes more precious than some high-grade gems. He tried to crush me completely with his bare hands, then tore the forest king into 108 pieces from within his body. As it fell rapidly, I slowly emerged from the swamp. While absorbing the forest king's blood, I had also absorbed the magic stone along with it. The magic power contained within this wanderer's form was immense. I feel stronger than ever before, and most importantly, I've gained a new ability from the mode. Activating it will conjure up black, scaly skin. This might allow me to move freely in the sunlight. I only discovered the existence of this forest king when the paladins came to besiege me in the forest. I managed to escape by drinking his blood during a lull in their fighting. Although I'm much stronger than in my previous life, it's still far from enough to fight those paladins. Moreover, that knight named Dilricht seems to have some kind of ability. No matter where I hide, he can always find me. So I must hurry up and become stronger. Just as I was about to leave, I suddenly heard a voice behind me. Turning around, I saw something that looked like an elf. He said that this lake was his Lord Million's territory, and then went on to spout a bunch of incredibly childish nonsense. He thought I couldn't see or hear him because only very special beings in the world could sense elves. But as he spoke, he noticed that I was staring intently at his steering wheel. Upon learning that I could see him, he immediately knelt on the ground and introduced himself as a water spirit. He explained that he was originally the master of this territory, but 15 years ago, after the Wanderer stole his disc, he became a slave. Now, thanks to me, he had killed the crocodile and was finally free. As he spoke, I noticed a tattoo on my body slowly disappearing. I don't know when I became a vampire, but it's been as long as I have memories. The tattoo was already on my body. In my previous life, I was only concerned with survival and didn't pay much attention to these tattoos. Now I guess they might be some kind of brand or curse. And today, because of something, I happened to break free of a curse. He wanted me to get dressed and tell Miriam that he was leaving, asking him to continue protecting the forest. Upon hearing that I was leaving, his mood instantly somber, because seeing spirits was extremely rare, and he hadn't had anyone to talk to for many years. So he suggested that I take him with me. We could go together, and he added that as a water spirit, he could produce very high-quality water. After saying this, he began gagging and vomiting water. I felt nauseous and quickly told him to get away, then turned and headed out of the forest. Seeing this, he chased after me, saying that if I wanted to get a large amount of water faster, besides vomiting, he had other methods. The scene shifts to the village of Broadwin a few days later. A young man rushed into the village chief's room, yelling for him to come out and see what was happening, saying the red-eyed monster had arrived. Soon, a crowd gathered at the village entrance. They saw piles of prey on the ground, all looking shocked. The red-haired man asked the village chief if the amount of prey was much greater than usual. Normally, the red-eyed monster only came once a year on the day of the full moon. The village chief calculated the time and said that it was still early for the full moon. For the past 10 years or so, I have lived near the village and have never harmed anyone. On the contrary, I would leave some prey at the village entrance late at night on the day of the full moon. When I first appeared more than 10 years ago, everyone was terrified. However, seeing me hunt online on time like paying taxes, they gradually stopped coming to me. That day, I arrived early and offered several times more prey than usual, then asked if I could stay in the village temporarily. The village chief, who spoke in classical Chinese, greeted me first, saying it was long time no see, before asking if I had anything to say. I told them that for years I had been living alone away from the village due to a strange illness. But recently, by chance, my illness had been successfully cured, so I wanted to come to the village to ask if there was anything I could help with. He said that if anything happened to the village, they could call me anytime. The moment they saw my true face, they were almost blinded by my handsome appearance. They thought, so the red-eyed monster we've been calling is actually a half-elf or a noble's son? This handsome face and gentle voice even made the 80-year-old village chief's heart skip a beat. Afterwards, Milian asked me why I had given all the food I had worked so hard to hunt to these people. In his memory, Yi Zi, many vampires are representatives of slaughter and death. I told her that it's important to get to know each other in human society, just like showing them kindness. Hearing this, Miriam was even more puzzled and asked, I don't plan to eat them now, but I want to associate with them. And I also said before that I would leave here in a few days. Before she could finish, I interrupted her, saying that he used to think that he didn't need to care about things that didn't concern him, but now he couldn't stand idly by and watch what was about to happen. Soon, a group of mercenaries would come. They were the people from the village. They would all die. Actually, the mercenaries were there to take away a boy from Broadwin village. Their goal was to take the boy to the castle of the local lord, Sir Win. In the process, in order to cover up the news, they decisively chose to kill them. Although Miriam was very puzzled after hearing this, wondering how I knew about the future, he was grateful that what I said was true. After these few days of contact, he still couldn't figure out my thoughts, and I could see his doubts. I told him that whether it was true or false, it would be revealed soon. But before that, I needed to gain the villagers' trust. I needed to let them know I was on their side. After walking a while longer, I suddenly stopped, causing Milian to bump into me without noticing. After getting up, he tapped my head and asked what I was doing. His voice trailed off as he saw a group of mercenaries approaching in the distance. Upon seeing me, they began to discuss that I seemed to be from the village. They had originally planned to sneak in without alerting anyone. The leader, however, ordered one of the men with an axe, "Hurry up! Don't make any screams." Upon receiving the order, the men grabbed their large axes and charged towards me. Seeing this, Milian frantically asked what to do. Before I could answer, he was already in front of me, leaping into the air. But I simply swung my arm lightly, and his head flew off. This sight sent shivers down the spines of the other mercenaries behind me, and even Milian was startled. As I withdrew my hand, which was covered in black wood, my eyes turned black as well. The mercenaries immediately realized what was happening. "I am a vampire," one of them shouted, drawing an arrow and urging everyone not to be afraid. "If we can capture a vampire alive and hand him over to the church, we'll get a hefty bounty." Before he could finish speaking, I had already strode forward and grabbed his weapon, my other hand following suit. Just as I took his phone, his teammate appeared behind me. Hearing the whoosh of the wind, I didn't turn around. Instead, I raised the weapon I had just seized and plunged it into the waistband of the man behind me. The other mercenaries, witnessing this, were too terrified to advance. Only a burly bald man swung his flail and continued charging towards me, which I didn't dodge, but instead raised my hand to meet it. The bald man knew perfectly well that his weapon weighed over 100 pounds, and with the force of his swing, it must have exerted at least 200 pounds of pressure. Yet, this seemingly frail boy had easily withstood that pressure. While the bald man was still in shock, I swiftly took his life. The mercenaries witnessed my strength. The extraordinary ones, no longer daring to try and save me alone, quietly surrounded me, preparing to attack together. But to me, this only added a little more exercise. 2.5 minutes later, the villagers were horrified to see the pile of mercenary corpses on the ground. The village chief asked, "Did I do all this by myself?" I said, "How could I? I just discovered it by chance when I returned from hunting. These people must have been intercepted by the Jade Seal on their way to Broadwind Village, and these guys must be the culprits." With that, I pointed to the corpses of several gray wolves behind the tree. He explained that he saw the wolves gnawing on the corpses on his way back from checking the traps, so he seized the opportunity to kill them, though several escaped. At this point, one man said there were indeed wolf claw marks on the corpses, and another man chimed in, saying there were also bite marks. The village chief was puzzled. While these gray wolves were naturally aggressive, it was unlikely they would recklessly attack so many mercenaries. But the evidence was undeniable, so he had no choice but to believe him. I then asked the village chief what to do with the corpses. The village chief said they couldn't be left to be eaten by wild animals and buried in the village. Behind me, Million watched me lie without batting an eye, and I was quite impressed. He knew perfectly well that I had dealt with the gray wolves after they were attracted by the mercenaries' blood, and that I had even used their teeth and claws to mark each of the mercenaries' corpses. He didn't understand why I was so concerned about my image. If we had left now, there would have been no need for all this trouble. When they were almost finished packing, I took an envelope out of my pocket. I handed it to the village chief, who had found it on the mercenaries. The chief immediately recognized it as bearing the seal of the local lord, Sir One. After opening the envelope and reading its contents, his eyes widened in shock. He then hurriedly turned to the surrounding villagers, asking if Phylid was there. Under the villagers' questioning, the chief spread rumors that Phylid might be Sir Wen's illegitimate son, and that the mercenaries had come to take him away. Seeing the chief's anxious expression, it reminded me of 2.5 minutes earlier when I had just repelled them. Their leader had never imagined my combat strength was so formidable. But he also knew that failing to complete the mission and returning empty-handed was pointless, so he reluctantly gave the order to attack again. The mercenaries, of course, knew this too, and could only grit their teeth and advance once more. Just as I had almost finished dealing with them, the leader launched a sneak attack from behind me. However, before he could reach me, I kicked him in the stomach. The powerful impact sent him flying more than 10 meters away, crashing into a large tree. He finally stopped. He lay on the ground and asked if I had been fighting them here since early morning, and why I had ambushed them. I walked over and asked them what their purpose was in that village. "I can't eat that village," I said. Upon hearing this, he quickly apologized, saying he didn't know that village was a vampire village. "Sir, you're in charge," he exclaimed. "You said you learned that the Lord's illegitimate son was hidden in that village, and your purpose was to get that illegitimate son." After listening to his story, I said, "Your lie is quite good, but if it's just for one illegitimate son, is it necessary to bring so many people?" Could it be that you want to kill everyone in the village? The guy, realizing his true intentions had been guessed, hurriedly said that wasn't entirely true, and revealed that they weren't hired by the head of the Diwan family. The person who commissioned them was actually a legitimate descendant of the family. Tamira and Belt had brought so many people to prevent any unforeseen events during the kidnapping of the illegitimate son. Hearing the name Belt, my heart tightened. It seemed the mastermind behind this incident was indeed that guy who had colluded with vampires in his previous life. The sniper team leader and Roan kept causing me trouble, but as a knight, Belker wouldn't directly order the mercenaries to slaughter the villagers. It must have been their greed. However, their actions alerted the paladins, leading to a large-scale search and investigation, which resulted in my discovery and eventual execution. As they turned to leave, they warned him to be careful of the wild beasts in the forest on his way back. The man, seeing I was about to spare him, thanked me profusely, but the next second, I threw a dagger at him. He was beheaded. Now that my vampire status was exposed, there was no time to leave him alive. Back to the present, the villagers began to recall that Phylid and his mother had arrived in Lai village 8 years ago, but his mother had died last year. Now, the mercenaries escorting him had been killed by wolves, leaving the village chief at a loss. Hearing this, I stepped forward and offered to escort Phylid to the Lord's castle myself. Besides, I've lived in the forest for many years and could avoid those wild beasts. After hearing this, the village chief asked, "Is this troublesome matter really something I'm willing to do?" I replied, "It's all right. As a knight, I can't ignore trouble." Milion, standing nearby, was quite taken aback when he heard me start praising him, even though it was a bit shameless. The villagers, upon hearing I was a knight, were all utterly astonished, their jaws dropping to the floor. Seeing that the effect had been achieved, I immediately pressed my advantage, saying I'd forgotten to introduce myself. "My name is Eugene, a knight from the Eugene family," Milion exclaimed. "Who would believe that?" This audio was generated by AI from the Magic Sound Workshop. After hearing what I said, the villagers couldn't believe it was true. They never imagined that the monster living around the village was actually a nobleman. Milion, in particular, was shocked, saying my lie was too outrageous. A vampire daring to claim to be a knight. I explained that their reactions showed they'd never seen a nobleman before, so even if I impersonated one, no one would notice. The crowd remained in shock. Later, they immediately rushed over to me, showering me with concern and asking if my years of seclusion in the forest were to heal the marks left from my cultivation. To this, I could only say that I had severed ties with the world for various reasons. The village chief then told me that the village was extremely poor and couldn't afford to pay me extra. I said it was all right, I was just looking to get some fresh air anyway, and asked if I could stay the night in the village. The village chief readily agreed to my simple request. The next morning, looking at the sunlight streaming through the window, I first had the black forest cover my palm and fingers, placing them in the sunlight. As I had guessed, wherever the black forest covered, the sunlight no longer bothered them. This should make the rest of my journey much smoother. Then, Milion came out and said I was a brainless vampire, asking why I had told such a lie yesterday. I don't even know how to read, yet I dared to call myself a knight. I said that my identity would be exposed someday, but anyway, I was leaving soon. It doesn't matter. Milion couldn't help but ask curiously. I've been living a quiet life in the forest. Why did I suddenly come out to establish relations with the villagers, and even accept their commissions without compensation? Before he could finish speaking, I heard someone outside calling my name, Eugene. Actually, when I got up and went out, I told Milion that a person's authority is more convincing than repeated words. My current identity can save me from telling many lies. However, this kind of low-level lie can only be believed by the people in this small mountain village. It won't expose me if I want to go to the big city. Don't let this lie become a reality. After everything was packed, the village chief personally wrote me an instruction letter to avoid any misunderstandings on the road. The boy named Phylid also stepped forward and gave a brief self-introduction. After meeting the other villagers, the two of us set off for the Duke's castle. After walking for a while, I saw what looked like a village halfway up the mountain. Phylid looked at the road sign behind me and said, "This is Brahm's village." Seeing that she could read the sign, I asked her if she could read. Phylid said that his mother had taught him to write when she was alive. Milion, upon hearing this, suggested I ask the little boy to teach me to read, and I readily followed Milion's advice, directly asking Phylid for help. Phylid, shocked, asked me, "A knight who can't read?" I sighed, my expression somber, and said, "Being a knight is just an empty title. After my family's decline, I have nothing to boast about." Phylid cautiously inquired about my family, wondering if I had lost my way. I didn't answer his question but turned and continued on the main road ahead. The purpose of this was to first arouse suspicion, then transform it into attraction. Miriam, who saw through my thoughts, said my acting was getting better and better, but if I made up too much of a story, it would only arouse suspicion. Turning around, I saw Philip's unwavering and sympathetic gaze. He apologized, saying he had actually been suspicious of me before because I kept saying I was dealing with monsters and that I was a nobleman. Now, seeing me in person, he was convinced I was from a samurai family and had overlooked the good guy at the end of the story, so he readily agreed. Afterwards, he'll teach me to read and write. Miriam laughed heartily after hearing this. Suddenly, I twisted and picked up an arrow flying from afar with my bare hands. When I moved the sword away, Philip reacted, retreating in fright. Looking back, he saw that the arrow had been placed behind one of the group of people not far ahead. One of them, seeing the arrow's accuracy, walked over to mock the archer's skill. Philip, on the field, panicked, thinking, "Am I being robbed?" The group of people, seeing only two of us, approached. "Let's throw our luggage on the ground." Hearing this, I did as they said, first taking off the luggage from my back. Then, as the man reached for it, I swiftly beheaded him. It all happened so fast that no one present saw the sword strike clearly until Phylid saw the rolling head on the ground. Only then did he understand what had just occurred. The bandits were all horrified to see their companion killed, while I simply stood there calmly saying, "Want my luggage? Come and get it." Another bandit. Seeing this, he swung his iron mace at me, but its attack was the same as the previous one. The next second, I rushed forward and joined them, decapitating them all with a few strokes. Only the man in the distance remained, seeing the situation was dire, turning to flee. To this, I lightly twisted my wrist, gripped the short blade, and forcefully threw it, delivering a fatal blow to his heart. After dealing with them, I stepped forward, drew my short blade, and said, "Why do humans always like to bully, plunder, and kill you?" Many people then asked Phylid if they would understand such things once they learned to read. After cleaning up the area, we entered Brahm's village. It was more like a city than a village. The sounds of vendors hawking their wares filled the air. They sold everything imaginable. The dazzling array of goods excited Milion, who had lived in the forest for years. However, Phylid warned me to be careful if I wanted to buy anything here. He and the village chief had been here several times before, and the merchants were very shrewd. You could easily be ripped off if you weren't careful. Just then, I saw a customer next to me wanting to return something for a refund because he had seen the exact same item at a nearby stall for half the price. But this posed no threat to me, as I was currently penniless. After browsing for a while, I came across a leather shop and took out several gray wolf pelts from my luggage, handing them over and asking the owner if he could appraise them. The owner glanced at them, recognizing them as gray wolf pelts, and asked me what I was. "Tong Menglai has brought so many. This kind of thing is rare around here." He then scanned my clothing, noticing my shabby appearance. He thought to himself, "I'm probably not a merchant, more like a vagrant. This is a good opportunity to make a quick buck." So he said, "My pelts are so badly damaged they're unusable. They're worth at most 18 silver coins." Hearing this, my face instantly darkened. The owner sensed a hint of murderous intent in my eyes, and his smile vanished abruptly. This was the first time he'd seen someone with red pupils. Realizing I wasn't someone to be trifled with, he quickly changed his tune, saying that considering the rarity of gray wolf pelts, he could give me more. But I remained silent, staring intently at him. The shopkeeper, sweating profusely from my stare, avoided eye contact. Finally, unable to withstand the pressure, he offered 23 coins, but I remained silent, just staring intently. Thinking I wasn't satisfied, he raised the price to 25, but seeing my silence, he immediately changed his mind. 28 coins. Even Phylid, standing nearby, was stunned by this move, his mouth agape. I still didn't utter a word, just kept staring. The shopkeeper's defenses were completely shattered. Finally, he gritted his teeth and offered 30 silver coins. At that moment, I finally said, "Deal." That night, we went to a clearing in the forest outside the city, lit a campfire, and by its light, I began to learn to read. But the characters looked like earthworms to me. Although I learned some basics from Phylid, I was still far from being able to read articles independently. This time at the market, I not only sold those wolf pelts for a high price, but also got a nice set of clothes. It wasn't at all like what Philip had described, a place rife with rape and murder. Standing before the shopkeeper, I was momentarily speechless. But the shopkeeper, seeing my deep understanding, kept adding to the story. Leon said I should be more assertive, ask for more money, and buy better clothes. I said I wasn't that particular. As long as it provided shade, that was fine. Million. She said that in her impression, vampires were generally the elite of the elite, often wearing expensive clothes in magnificent castles bathed in moonlight, savoring fresh blood like fine wine. After hearing her story, I asked her, "Didn't you always live in the forest? You seem to know quite a bit about the outside world." She explained that she originally lived on the edge, where occasionally powerful figures from the human world would die and reach that place. She said that vampires like me only needed to be protected from silver objects or wooden stakes. Therefore, I should live for at least 200 years, allowing me to learn more and acquire more skills. After hearing her words, I asked her if she could read. Million, as expected, said no. I continued, asking if she possessed any other skills besides making drinking water. At that moment, Phylid came up from behind and asked who I had been talking to. I told her that I sometimes liked to talk to myself, and pulled several crumpled sheets of paper from my backpack, saying that the night was still long and that I could learn as many times as I wanted. Several more hours passed. "Well, I can already recite many rules," I said, and then asked Phylid if learning writing was truly so quick. Phylid said no, it took him several months to reach this level, and some people even spend a year to reach my current level. Hearing his praise, I asked her again, "Besides literacy, there are many other things nobles need to learn." My purpose was to get this illegitimate son of the Lord to teach me more. Unfortunately, she said her mother hadn't taught him either. The others asked if the cold weather would really welcome his arrival. Just then, a group of people approached from a distance and greeted me. The leader said they were getting late and hadn't found a suitable campsite yet, so they asked if they could ask us something. Actually, I had already heard the sound of hooves before they even arrived. Now that they were closer, I noticed they were all equipped with decent armor and weapons. It seemed this group was different from the ragtag army we'd seen before. They were real mercenaries. Seeing that I didn't speak, the man asked about our destination. I knew perfectly well that using a low-level lie on these mercenaries would only arouse suspicion, so I told them the truth. We were heading to Sir Wen's castle. The man said they were also going to Sir Wen's castle and asked if we could join them. They could provide us with food. At this point, a young man with blonde hair stepped forward and said, "Why is Commander Patrick so blunt?" He even said to me that they wouldn't mind joining us. Hearing his arrogant tone, my face immediately darkened. Patrick, standing nearby, chuckled and pushed aside the blonde-haired boy, saying, "That kid just joined the mercenary group recently and doesn't know the rules yet. Don't take offense." We then introduced ourselves. When Mabon heard me say I was a knight, she immediately stepped forward and mocked, saying I didn't look like a knight at all, without even armor or a horse, yet I dared to call myself one. She even pointed at my chest, saying she'd never heard of the Eugene family and that I was definitely an imposter. While she was saying this, I was also weighing the pros and cons. I had already told Phylid I was a knight, and I couldn't let them expose me now. These mercenaries must have another reason for approaching us. Whether I was actually a knight or not wasn't important. But if they kept pursuing me like this, things would change. Looking around, they didn't seem to number much. If I made a move, I could guarantee to wipe them all out. Thinking this, I drew my long sword slightly from my waist. Just as a fierce battle was about to erupt, Patrick appeared in time, pulling Laban back. The next second, he swung his arm and delivered a powerful slap. The slap sent Laban flying, his eyes seeing stars, until he crashed into a tree behind him. Patrick then bowed deeply to me, apologizing to his shocked subordinates. Seeing how much he had gone to, I didn't pursue the matter further and told them to find a suitable place to camp. At the same time, I realized that similar incidents might become more frequent, and I needed to hurry up and transform myself into a true knight. Later that night, Phylid and I continued to sit by the fire. Laban on the Red Cross side slept for several hours without waking up. When he finally did, he sat up abruptly and asked himself, "What happened?" Patrick, seeing him awake, immediately berated him. "What a bastard! How dare he lay a hand on a knight? You're lucky to be alive, kid. You're the one who saved the whole group from death," she said, still angry, and swung her fist at Laban's head. Laban, clutching his head, said, "Look at that guy. His clothes weren't anything special, and his sword was tattered. What was there to be afraid of?" His brother said he was really ignorant. "Look at that robe he's wearing. How much did it cost? It's a high-class robe made of fine leather and champagne. Even the cheapest one costs at least 10 silver coins. And look at him constantly reading letters. That means he can read and isn't an ordinary person. Besides, he almost drew his sword. If he had, the whole group would probably be dead. If we'd been lucky, maybe only me and one other person would have survived." Laban, puzzled, asked the captain, "How did you know that?" Hearing this, Patek narrowed his eyes and said, "Just now, you little rascal." While speaking recklessly, unaware of his own limitations, the knight slipped his right hand inside his robe and slightly shifted his left foot back. This seemingly insignificant movement revealed his practiced adjustment of his center of gravity, a mechanical movement. "If I had acted any later, your head would be gone," he thought. "Even if he had actually drawn his sword, Commander, you could have simply intervened." Pack said, "The terrifying nature of knights is unimaginable. They often begin practicing with wooden swords from birth. They dedicate their lives to learning the art of killing. Once they mature, they venture into various dangerous dungeons for training, facing death without fear. Later, they go to the battlefield, accumulating glorious achievements. Only those with enough blood on their hands can catch the eye of the nobles and ultimately be knighted, becoming true knights. However, impersonating a knight is a grave crime. If such a person were to appear, the problem would be dire because of their cowardice. Those who impersonate knights are definitely not normal. Unless they are extremely confident in their swordsmanship, they would never dare to impersonate a knight so easily. Among those doctors who wield swords, how many can become knights? That person looks to be only in his 20s. For someone that age to openly declare himself a knight means he possesses a considerable level of skill. Laban, hearing this, was already sweating profusely. He asked the captain, "So, does that mean that knight is stronger than you?" Patrick replied, "I'm afraid so. And that guy just said he was also going to Sir Wen's castle. Apparently, the portal they discovered recently is about to open, and he probably wants a piece of the pie too. Because I'm a vampire, my hearing is exceptionally sharp, and I overheard their entire conversation. I only just realized how much weight that title carries. But it seems everyone except that guy named Laban is a real mercenary. Why would the one family hire such trash to go to a village when they have plenty of mercenaries? Or maybe they sent their own soldiers. That struck me as odd. Thinking it over, I got up and walked towards the captain. Laban, seeing me, jumped up in fright and asked Patrick what to do. Was the guy coming to cause trouble for him? But when I reached them, I didn't mention his earlier offense. Instead, I asked them if they were also going to Sir Wen's castle, and if so, why not travel together. When they saw my stunningly beautiful face after I removed my mask, they were all blinded. Laban said yes, thinking to himself, "Damn, this guy is really handsome." The next day, the scene shifted to a dual leader town called Mart-Era. During this time, I successfully gained the trust of the mercenary groups. This allowed me to gather a considerable amount of useful intelligence on the road. Suddenly, a bright light flashed beside me, and then Milion appeared out of nowhere, saying that he had eavesdropped on the mercenaries' conversation as I had instructed. Upon his return, I asked him if he had any useful information. From Milion, I learned that Sir Wen's health was extremely poor and he could die at any moment. Also, a dungeon had been discovered deep within the Oneling Mountains. Capturing this dungeon would yield a substantial reward. However, the Oneling family was currently short of both money and manpower, so they couldn't conquer it alone. Milion then asked me what to do with Phylid. If he died from the plague, he would be an orphan again. I said that wasn't my concern. Milion then said, "That kid is truly pitiful. If he goes back like this, he'll probably be played to death by his own brothers." Looking at Phylid behind me, I figured the reason Low Temperature had summoned him was probably to see his son before he died. Perhaps from the moment we embarked on this journey together, our fates would be altered in some way. After traveling for a while longer, we finally arrived at Rose Castle, the castle of the Low Temperature Lord. Looking at the magnificent building, I remarked that it was much larger than I had imagined. Milion patted my head, telling me to hurry up and work hard to live in a castle like that. Along the way, Phylid watched me, thinking about my inner monologue. The symptoms were truly severe. Just as we were about to enter the city, we were stopped by a group of people. They made us carry a man named Patek, saying we were a mercenary group sent by the Pylon Merchant Guild, and asked who the man was. The man said he was the heir of Low Temperature. Kamala even asked if the goods in the back of the carriage were their cargo. After confirming the cargo list, the mercenaries began unloading. During the handover, Kamala asked me, standing still, who was I and why I wasn't working with them. Seeing this, I introduced myself as Knight Yang Eugene. Before I could even introduce myself, a group of people approached from a distance. The leader shouted, "Brother Kamara," and asked him what he was doing. Upon seeing the newcomer, Kamara's face immediately turned extremely disgusted, and I felt a slight tremor upon hearing that familiar voice. As the man approached, he said to Kamara, "Checking outsiders is the duty of our garrison. Brother, how can you always forget?" I knew that voice all too well. I could say I would never forget it in my previous life. He was the first to discover me, the head of the vampire pursuit team, who then pinned all sorts of fabricated charges on me, torturing me to death. This man was the second son of the Diwan family, also known as the heir. Actually, when faced with the questioning, Kamara said that he didn't need to report to him about his actions. Anyone who didn't know better would think he was the heir. Bertel said that wasn't what he meant. Just as the two were locked in a tense standoff, I stepped forward and handed them an envelope, saying it was a letter from the village chief of Broadwin. Upon hearing the name, Bertel quickly raised his hand to take the letter, but just before he touched it, I withdrew my arm and handed it to Kamala behind me. This action earned me a suspicious and strange look from Bertel. Then, after Kamala finished reading the letter, she exclaimed in shock, "How is this possible? Not only have the mercenaries been attacked by wolves and wiped out, but the child this knight brought is actually his father's illegitimate son." Phylid also hurriedly stepped forward and bowed. We introduced ourselves. Facing her new brother, Kamala smiled and said, "Father is waiting for you." But Bertel's face was grim. Finally, he ordered his men to take Phylid to bathe and change into clean clothes, then turned and left without looking back. At this moment, I suddenly stepped forward and stopped him, saying I wanted to discuss the payment first. Sir Winston, whom I was to see, immediately refused upon hearing this, saying that the Lord was currently unwell and unable to receive guests, and then refused my payment. "So, gold coins, please let me go back, Bates," I persisted. "I've gone to quite a bit of trouble along the way." Bertel's face showed a slight bulge of veins as he asked me, "Didn't you hear what he just said?" Tamara then stepped forward and asked Bertel, "What's going on?" "The new brother is also going to see father. What's the problem with them both?" Bertel said, "Father isn't even lucid for an hour a day these days. We can't let these wanderers of unknown origin see us whenever they want." Kamara immediately became sarcastic upon hearing this. "So now, you even want to control my father's daily life?" This infuriated Bertel, who asked him why he always misinterpreted his words. Having achieved his goal, Kamara stopped riding and turned to apologize to me, apparently because something about someone playing the succession game was proving difficult. As he passed me, he patted my shoulder, telling me to be careful on my way back, and then led Fred towards the castle. From his attitude, it wasn't hard to tell that he hadn't intended for me to see Sir One from the beginning. Before I could finish my thought, a gruff voice interrupted my thoughts. Turning around, I saw a burly, red-haired man. He approached and asked Bertel where he'd been, complaining that he'd been looking for him for ages. Bertel, seeing the many mercenaries he'd abandoned, hurriedly asked what was going on. The red-haired man said these were mercenaries plundering villagers. He'd captured them while passing by, and asked Bertel if he wanted to kill them all as an example to others, although they were only temporarily hired for the dungeon raid. Hearing this, Bertel glanced at me first, then said, "I'll discipline those mercenaries. There are too many people here. Let's go inside and talk." The man also headed towards the castle. Patrick walked up to me and said, "That man is Galfredicock, right?" I asked him if he knew him. Patrick introduced him, saying that he had recently won third place in a tournament hosted by the Evgro family, a very promising knight with strength comparable to a beast and superb martial arts skills. He said that, at the tournament that day, he defeated over 1,000 competitors. After listening to his explanation, I asked why such an outstanding person would choose to come to this city. Patrick said, "I guess he's also here for this newly discovered dungeon. Successfully opening a dungeon can bring immense prestige. However, opening a dungeon is extremely difficult and many have died trying. Galfredicock probably wants to use this dungeon as a stepping stone to be knighted by a larger family." After he finished speaking, I asked him if the delivery of the goods meant the end of their commission. "Now I have a new commission. Do you want to take it?" I asked. "The mercenaries from the daytime are being punished in the training grounds of Rose Castle tonight." Upstairs, Kamara looked out the window, thinking that this time he had to open the dungeon himself. Since his father's health deteriorated, that Guy Bertel had made no secret of his ambition for the airship, and now he was using his connections with knights to bring in Knight Galfredic. Invited him here, he thought. Clearly, his target was also this dungeon. Now, he couldn't just hire any random people. Just as he was agonizing over this, there was a knock at the door. An announcement came that Knight Eugene requested an audience. This piqued his curiosity. What did I want with him? After I entered the room, he stood up and politely greeted me, saying that Phylid was doing well and he would ensure his safety. He also said that he would reward me for escorting Phylid when my father woke up. After sitting down, he thanked me for delivering the letter earlier that day. After Belt finished speaking, I said I only had important matters to discuss with the Lord. Kamara sat down and asked if I wanted to see his father to obtain his identity certification. I said that was only part of the reason, but my main purpose in coming here was to make a request to Sir Tamara. Kamara, hearing that I had come to see him, was a little puzzled and asked what I wanted. I told him I wanted to join the new dungeon raiding party. Upon hearing this, he started slapping his chair and laughing loudly, then called me Kobe. He was as amusing as I had imagined, asking if joining the raiding party was to improve my reputation as a knight. He also asked why she would let me join, just to kill 5 or 6 bandits outside the city. To this, I smiled slightly and said calmly that my suggestion should be entirely beneficial to you. If the dungeon is successfully opened, my reward is only 100 silver coins, plus half of the additional items besides the main content. After hearing my conditions, Tamara said that this was much lower than the average market price. This inevitably made me suspicious. I told her that my conditions were limited, and whether she believed me or not was up to her. Kamara wasn't in a rush. I thought to myself, often people live for honor and are willing to die for it. But looking at my attire, like a wandering knight without family connections, yet I still managed to show no greed for money, it seemed honor truly came first. And from my last sentence, she understood what I meant. Bertel had a powerful knight, while he had nothing to offer. This made her feel that I knew how to assess the situation, unlike those ordinary knights who were all brawn and no brains. She wanted to agree immediately and extended her hand. Actually, these words were what Patek had taught me. He said that not only was the evolution of the model difficult, but the related fees were also very high. Conversely, the byproducts could be sold quickly, generating substantial profits. He would also introduce me to familiar merchant guilds, so as long as I only asked for the byproducts, Lady Kamara would definitely accept. Soon, news of Kamara's renewed expedition and the addition of new members reached Belt Elton. Galfredik, twirling the short blade in his hand, said, "The dungeon is no place for playing around. A slight misstep can lead to being separated from the group, or even death." Belt Elton thought for a moment, chuckled, and said, "Don't worry about it. The people my brother found aren't much better. They have poor relations with the surrounding nobles and limited connections. So he wants Galfredik to come see me personally so we can talk." Suddenly, his door opened, and Tamara strode in confidently, saying, "Let me introduce my purpose for this trip, to be accompanied by the Golden Knight and his mercenary group." Belt Elton recognized her immediately. Wasn't she the wandering knight who had escorted Phylid back? She said she couldn't let someone of unknown origin and strength join the team. Tamara mentioned her origin. While she couldn't guarantee her strength, she could vouch for her, because she had heard that the bandit group causing trouble on the border had been dealt with by her just a few days ago with a short blade. As we spoke, Galfredik subtly bent his wrist and silently tossed a short blade at me. Without even turning my head, I deflected it with an arrow. The blade, sent flying, stumbled so hard it nearly embedded itself in the wall. Seeing this, Galfredik gave a wicked smile, then stood up and said, "My apologies for our first meeting. You remarked that I have no scars or sunburns on my exposed skin. So you seem to be a pampered young master. May I witness your skills?" We then went to the castle's training grounds. Upon hearing that Knight Galfredik was going to duel, the members of the standing committee rushed to the training grounds, quickly crowding the area. Everyone wanted to see what this legendary knight of immense strength possessed, and they were also curious about who dared to challenge him. Upon arriving at the scene, they saw Galfredik's tree-like. His towering figure contrasted sharply with my frail appearance. Everyone thought I was no match for him. Seeing that the time was almost up, Galfredik drew his long sword, signaling his readiness. I too raised my short sword in response. The referee, seeing we were both ready, immediately announced the start of the duel. As soon as the referee finished speaking, we clashed. After a brief stalemate, he forced Galfredik back with his sword, while simultaneously making a provocative gesture towards me. Seeing his expression, I hesitated for a moment. Then I stopped retreating, drew my sword again, and charged at him. From below the arena, Laban shouted, "Truly worthy of Eugene. His aura has rendered Galfredik utterly powerless." Patrick, standing nearby, said, "No, that's just a test. It's Galfredik." The knight deliberately retreated to observe the arena. Galfredik seemed quite at ease with my attacks. Watching my moves, he thought my swordsmanship was more rudimentary than he had imagined, lacking any consistent style. He couldn't discern any particular sword technique I used. While lacking refined skill, it possessed a wild quality. After a few exchanges, he asked if I wasn't a knight at all, saying my swordsmanship was completely unfounded, revealing from my movements that I hadn't received any formal training, relying solely on instinct to slash relentlessly. He completely ignored him and told him to shut up. He said he'd shut up if I could beat him. With that, he paused and suddenly thrust his sword at me. I quickly raised my short blade to parry. The next second, she suddenly abandoned her original attack pattern and forcefully pressed her long sword downwards. In the instant my short blade was pinned to the ground, She twisted and lifted me up, swinging her long sword at me. Fortunately, I reacted quickly enough to block her sudden attack. But her strength was indeed as terrifying as rumored. The impact of her swing sent me flying dozens of meters. Bertel, seeing the floor shattered, assumed I was unconscious, but when the dust settled, I was like a cannonball launched from Galvdirek, seeing that I could counterattack in such a short time, even displaying a slight resemblance to the Book of Songs in the following moves. Then he discovered that I was actually imitating his previous moves. This astonished him. There were indeed people in the world with the ability to comprehend such a fast person. I imitated him, pressing his long sword to the ground and preparing to unleash a powerful blow. He immediately withdrew his sword, turning to parry. With a loud clang and a dazzling shower of sparks, our weapons clashed simultaneously. The next second, we dropped our short swords, our hands meeting, gripping them tightly.